So what I'm doing is clicking the display name, which is this one, which is unique for each line, and that's representative of one line will be representative of one employee. So now let me zoom in. We have this summary of how many employees are in each department. And another good thing with Excel pivot tables is that you can also add in another granularity in the columns. So for example, let's add in status. Now this will break your data down into with how many contractual employees are in this department and so on. Okay, so this gives you an easy way to fold the data into this kind of summaries. And the main reason why it's pivot, I mentioned earlier, you can rotate your data into different views. So maybe you don't want this view. Let's try switching it between rows and columns. Okay, so maybe you'd want this view. Again, it will totally depend. There's no one view uh, which is proven to be the correct view. It all depends on how you want to portray your data. And then the good thing with pivot tables is you're not actually messing around with the actual data. So anything you do here in a pivot table does not affect in any way your raw data. So you can do anything. So feel free to mess around with pivot tables. It won't do any harm to your raw data. And that's one thing which I see most of the time for beginner users. They're too intimidated by the pivot table and to the point that they won't dare try doing pivots. So again, multiple ways of doing this. There's no one correct way. It all depends on whether you can drive into a summary or into a conclusion on your current view. Okay, so there are also other capabilities here. So maybe you don't want to look at counts. So maybe you'd want to look at uh, percentage. So let's look at percentage. So, so right-clicking, summarize values, or sorry, show values as, let's say, percent of row total. Okay, so what this means is that, again, we don't have these values in the raw data, but Pivot can calculate these values for you. So what this says now here is that in this department, majority of my staff are full-time. So you can easily derive that conclusion. So again, and that's percent row. You can also summarize into percent column total. So now you can see that bulk of my contractuals across the organization is coming from manufacturing. Okay, so it's much easier to drive into such conclusions depending on how you present your data. Again, we're transforming data, and we're basically analyzing data using Excel pivot. So again, I can talk about pivot tables in a whole day because there's just so many functions available in pivot. But again, I'd leave it here for now in the interest of time. But let me know if you have questions offline. Okay, so we'll quickly jump to charts and graphs. So in one main skill set which every data analyst needs to develop is on how to visually represent the data, because not everyone will be able to appreciate numbers such as this, tables such as this, although this is already summarized from what, 700 lines of data, but still some prefer visual representations. So Excel is also a powerful tool in terms of charting, and there are also other tools in the industry which are used specifically for charting, like Spotfire. But Excel is also powerful in itself. Okay, so Excel has numerous charting options, and what I want to highlight here is that there's no pure answer on what chart type is the best. Again, it all depends on what you think is the most appropriate for you and your audience. The bottom line here is that you need to be able to convey a summary or a decision based on your data. Okay, so several keystroke shortcuts I highlighted here, and I will use them in a while. Okay, so in this exercise, I have several sets of data, and I'll be showing several ways of charting. Uh, okay, so let's look at this first data. So whenever we chart, one rule of thumb is that when you're selecting your data, uh, do not include the totals. So just select the raw data, the data which you want to chart. Okay, so in this case, this is a random data set, which again I found at LinkedIn Learning. So there are several ways. I think there are 5 ways of bringing in a chart in Excel. So my favorite is keyboard shortcut, is Alt F1. So I'm holding in Alt and then F1. So this will bring up a default clustered column chart. And what I want about this method is that it eliminates the paralysis by analysis, because the conventional way of bringing in a chart is going to insert and then going through each of these charts here and selecting whatever you want. So for me, it's easier to just bring in a default chart, and from here, it's very easy to change the chart, change how it looks, depending on what you need. Okay, so let's say, for example, this is what you need. So right now, the default is per product, and then bar charts, side-by-side bar charts of sales, depending on the region. So, but maybe you don't want this, and it's very easy to change. So go to the design ribbon. So whenever you're selecting a chart, these two design and format ribbons will show up. So design, uh, one common tool similar to pivot table is switching the rows and columns of data. So just switching this can significantly change how your visuals will look. And again, there's no one pure answer onto what kind of chart is the best, but again, it all depends on how you want to portray your data. So in this case, maybe you want to split it out in terms of region, and then what are the relative sales per item per region. Okay, so let's get rid of that and let's try a different way. Let's when you highlight your data, there's also this uh, quick analysis on the bottom right. So this can also give you different charts. Okay, so let's do a clustered bar chart now. Okay, so earlier I showed you a clustered column chart. The main difference of a clustered bar chart is that it's oriented on horizontally instead of vertically, but basically the same thing. And it's so I already talked about two chart types, which is included in what we call the big four charts. So we have two more charts which I want to show. Okay. Oh, before I go to the other charts, so I already talked two methods of pulling in charts. Another method is hitting F11 in your keyword, and that will give you a standalone chart in a separate workbook or a separate worksheet. Okay, in cases where you want to really just look into your chart without any distractions. Okay, okay, so let's try to look at the other data sets here. So for example, this one we can again use Alt F1, and then let's go to this change chart type. So here it will be very easy to change your charts. You can go through each of these options and see how your chart will preview. But on one of the four charts, big four charts, which I mentioned, is also the pie chart. Okay, so again, everyone's very familiar already with the pie chart. So it's just a addition of pieces, a totality of sub pieces. But what I want to point out is that there's also a new chart type in Excel, which we call tree map, which is personally my new favorite if we want to look at how portions relate to a totality. So let's go to select this data, Alt F1, oops, sorry, change chart type, and then under here, tree map. Oops, sorry, wrong data. Let's use this instead. Do it again, chart type, tree map. Okay, okay. So let's select a design wherein it will show. Okay, yeah. Let's do this. Okay, so a tree map works in the same way as a pie chart, but this is more of a 2D view or of a rectangular view. Again, the portions are scaled to the totality, and yeah, it's just a different way of looking at portions relative to the whole. Okay, you can also do this if you have two-level summaries. Like, let's try this. Let's say you have categories within a category, similar to this. Let's see if that will work. Come in the charts. Yep. So here is another tree map, but this time a two-level category. So let's say category A is for sales for bedroom, kids room, living room. So you can easily see that category A is the majority of the overall sales, while your category B is the minority in terms of total sales. Again, you cannot do this in a simple pie chart. So two-level categories cannot be performed in pie charts, but you can do it in tree maps. Okay, and then uh, if you also have time-dependent data, it's usually very helpful to look at it in a trend line. So line charts are come in handy in this case. So let's say we have sales by month by region. Then Alt F1, change chart type into line. Okay, so now you will see different lines per region, and then your x-axis will be uh, dates. So again, this is very useful if you have a date variable in your raw data. And you can, so if you're curious how it will look like if we do a switch row column, now it won't really make sense because your x-axis is no longer a date, so you're not really representing a trend. So again, rule of thumb for trend lines is that your x-axis should be date-based. Okay, so another way of doing this in Excel of analyzing trends is with the use of sparklines. Sparkline is a relatively new chart type in Excel. It is an in-cell chart, meaning the chart is built in inside a cell, so it's easier to demonstrate. So I'll select this data and then bottom right, quick analysis, go to the rightmost sparklines, and then just click here. So what this gives us is a sparkline, a trend line, uh, which is representative of each row of data. Okay, so if you intend to look at what's your trend, if you want to look if you have a downward trend, an upward trend per row of data, then this is an easier tool to use. It also does not take up so much space, just like what we have seen in the standard or conventional line chart. One thing to take note of, though, is that the magnitudes of this uh, lines are not scaled across the different rows. So what I mean here is, for example, in this chart, your last row or your last data is 156, right? But it looks to be on the peak of this trend line. But if you compare it to other, say for example, this one, visually it looks lower, the last data point, but numerically it's actually higher, 244. So just a word of caution there in interpreting sparklines. You're not supposed to compare sparklines uh, numerically because they're not scaled. It's more of a way to see what your data trend is on a row level. Okay. And then you can also do some design modifications here in the sparkline ribbon. So you can highlight your low point. You can also highlight your high point, and you have all the flexibility to change colors and so on. You can also switch this into a different chart, like a column chart or a win-loss chart. Again, depending on what you need. Okay, so and let's. All right. So one last data set. For example, I have this raw data, and I also this is a raw data of number of views per video in a LinkedIn course. And let's say we'd want to have a tree map of this data. We'd want to summarize which videos have the largest amount of views and so on. So my process will be, first I'll need to summarize this into a pivot table. So let's do that. Control A. Oops. First, make sure that your data is contiguous. So thousands of lines of data. Control A. Insert pivot table. This time I'll go to existing worksheet. And let's say I want to have a count of the user IDs who viewed each video. So basically, I drag user ID here. Okay, so one interesting thing which happens here is that Excel automatically aggregates the user ID into sum when in fact we want a count. The reason why Excel is doing that is because user ID is formatted to be a numeric data field. But it's easy to change that. So just go to this drop-down value field settings. Instead of sum, we want to summarize by count. Okay, now that gives us a count of the views, actual views per video in this raw data. And then from there, we can insert a chart. Or sorry, we need to copy this over first into raw data. And then still doing Alt F1, change chart type, tree map. And now this gives you a tree map of the view counts per video. Okay. So that's one sample quick analysis on raw data, transforming it with a pivot table into summaries and then visualizing with a tree map chart. Okay. All right. So I think that's what I have for charts. Let's go to the third section. Okay. So the third section is I'm stepping back into the first part, which is inspection, cleaning, and data management. But this time we'll talk about one of the most commonly used functions outside of arithmetic functions in Excel. So this is a VLOOKUP. So I mentioned earlier that uh, in most cases, your data will have missing parts. Well, actually, in a perfect world, your data should have, or your raw table should have everything you need to perform an analysis. But obviously, this is not a perfect world. So in most cases, your data is all over the place. So you may have pieces of data coming from one source and the pieces of data coming from another, may be saved by your colleague in one local computer. One data set is coming from a database, and so on. And most of the time, data analysis will, or your goals as a data analyst uh, will require will require you to have all those data in front of you and be processed in a meaningful way. So that's where VLOOKUP comes in. So, oops, sorry. Yeah. Uh, okay, I had a typo here. I copied over a different sheet, but uh, VLOOKUP basically is a way to pull in your data from a different location. So, uh, for example, uh, okay, for example, we have this list wherein we have a unique social security number, employee name, salary, and tax rate. And then we also have a lookup table here of corresponding tax rates depending on your salary. So the most common thing to use in fetching this tax rate from this lookup table is the VLOOKUP formula. So VLOOKUP basically means that the syntax means that you're looking for this first value, which is your lookup value, in a location which we call the table array, which I'll lock by using F4 in my keyboard to be an absolute reference. And then fetching uh, the data which is identified by a column index number, meaning you'll fetch the data from a specific column number. In this case, there's only two columns and we want to get the tax rate. So it's relatively easy to identify that this is the second column of the table array. So I'll put in two. And then there's also an optional argument in the last argument of VLOOKUP, whether it needs to be an approximate match or an exact match. In this case, since we're approximating the salaries based on this salary brackets, we'll just keep this as true. Okay, so, and that gives us these values. Okay, so one downfall of VLOOKUP is that for beginners, it is intimidating because the syntax itself is not entirely user-friendly. And it's one thing which is very intimidating, I find, for most new users of Excel. But it gets the job done. And I'll show you another way of making this VLOOKUP less intimidating. But let's double check our values first. So in this case, page Lisa, 63K is roughly around between here. So now the approximate match rounds it down to 55, which is, again, an approximate match. Okay, and let's do another example wherein we'd want to get the years of service, which is now again on a different location or different source table. So let's say years. Okay, but this time I'll be using a concept which is called range names. So instead of selecting cells, similar to what we did, let me undo that. Instead, I'll put in years here. Okay, so instead of doing this, which is relatively uh, difficult to understand in terms of syntax, let's simplify. So I'll select the whole column here by hitting in Control Shift down, and I'll go to this name box right here. So what we'll do is we will name this set of cells as let's call this Social Security. Let's just call this SS table. Okay, and then let's select this. This will be our table array or our lookup table, and let's just select this. Okay, I already named it as details. So details. Now, so with that in mind, instead of selecting cells, so we'll just type in what we just did. So I already named the cells as SS table. So SS table will now start showing up when I try to type it in. So SS table, and then where will we get the data from the details data, which I just named earlier. Okay, so now as I complete typing it, it will already highlight this table, comma, and let's say we want the years. So that will be the third column, 1, 2, 3 of this table. And then now we want an exact match. So I'll just type in false, or 0 will also work. 0. Okay, and that gives you uh, matching results. Okay, so again, so that's how VLOOKUP works. VLOOKUP is a means of fetching your data from a different source. And the main criteria for VLOOKUP to work is that your first columns should be matched, meaning your search column should be in the first column, or sorry, your search item should be in the first column of your lookup array. Okay, but as I mentioned, one of the main issues with VLOOKUP is that its readability or its syntax is not entirely intuitive, especially if we do the conventional way. So one way of simplifying it is by using range names. Again, you can Google how to do range names. It's very easy. Again, just select your cells and then put in a name in the name box, and then you can use that in your formula uh, arguments moving forward. Okay, and okay, so another thing which I want to highlight regarding VLOOKUP is it has an inherent weakness, being it a static lookup. And what I mean by static lookup is that the third argument, which is the column index number, is hard coded into this formula. So what happens if for some reason we want to insert a new column in this raw data? So you will see that the year's output in this VLOOKUP formula will no longer be true. It will now show 0 because, again, if we double check the third column now of your table array, of your lookup table, is a blank. So how do we fix that? So instead of hard coding the third argument, we will replace it with another function, which we call match. Okay, so match is a function which returns a relative uh, coordinate, so to speak, depending on your data. So let's look at match as a standalone function. So match has just three arguments. So match is the first argument is the lookup value. So in this case, let's try this. And then match works in one-way streets. So it can either work in a single column or in a single row. It will not work if you select multiple rows and columns. So in this case, we can try to check the relative location of 4419940 in this column, in this array, with an exact match, which is 0. And it will return a value of 2 because it is the second in this row. So you can see how this can be used to substitute the third argument of VLOOKUP by saying, let's find what's the column number of the status field across this table. Okay, now that will give you 6. So if we integrate the match function into into the VLOOKUP function, so okay, again, so let's do years again, but this time substituting the VLOOKUP third argument with a match function. So let's do SS table. So we're looking for the values in this SS table, already highlighted here, from the details table, which we named earlier. Now, instead of hard coding the number of columns wherein we'd want to fetch the data, we'll use a match function. Okay, so match, and then select cell F1 because we'd want to get the data for years. I lock this by using F4 in my keyboard to make it an absolute reference. And then the second argument for the match is where we'd want to look for the data. So we'd want to find out where status is. Again, match will only work on a single or on a one-way street. So I'm just selecting the column headers here. Okay, and one rule of thumb is that the dimensions for your match lookup array should also be equal to the dimensions of your details array in the lookup. It should be the same size basically. Okay, I'll lock this with F4 and then type in 0. And then that leaves us with the last argument for VLOOKUP, which is exact match, which should be 0. Okay, so now that gives us the same results. But now, see, if I insert a column here, let's see what happens in these two VLOOKUP functions. Okay, so the first function which we used was the static version. This is the conventional VLOOKUP, while the second here is using the match. So even when we inserted a column, an empty column here, your value remains true. And actually, we can also change the value here. So let's say I no longer want to look at the years, but I want to get a hire date. So I'll copy hire date here and then get that over, copy that over, and then make sure that the formatting is correct. And now I have a hire date without changing anything in my formula. Okay. Let's do that again, but this time let's do building. So now it automatically refreshes your data without you needing to change what column number you want, because now it's dynamic. What I also want to do is go to data and then data validation. And I'd want to make this a list, and you'll see why. Make this a list. Okay, once I did that, that enables this drop-down button here, and I can quickly change my data without needing to redo uh, the formula. Okay, so a pretty handy tool, especially if you want to get multiple lines of data from a different source table. Okay, so again, those two functions, VLOOKUP and VLOOKUP and match, are one of the most uh, well-used formulas functions of Excel in data analytics. Okay, so yeah, there are other types of dynamic lookups like index and match, which are way more complicated compared to VLOOKUP and match. But those methods, especially index and match, are the most powerful tools for lookup using Excel. But I won't go through that in this crash course. For most intents and purposes, I'd say 90% of the time you'd be able to do the job with a VLOOKUP, and even make it easier if you integrate the match function with the VLOOKUP. Okay, so that was a pretty heavy topic for VLOOKUP, and then so I'd want to end the crash course with a relatively fun tool. So uh, most people don't realize that Excel in itself has a camera. Uh, well, camera is being used loosely here, but basically uh, Excel has a capability to create a dynamic image of a cell or a range of cells, which you can use within the workbook. So one common application of this camera is when we use dashboards. So for example, I'd want to summarize all of my work from the different exercises here in this dashboard. So uh, conventional way to do it is maybe copy over this pivot table into that dashboard, and then copy in some charts from this table into that dashboard. But I find that this is a more foolproof and an easier way to summarize into dashboards is to use the camera tool. So what's a camera tool? So in the quick access toolbar, you can show more commands, click in more commands, and then all commands. And then if you scroll, this is sorted alphabetically. You'll find a camera. Camera. You can just click in add, and I already have it here in my quick access. But if not, you'll just click in add and then hit OK. So what this will do is that it will give you this button on the upper left. Okay, so let's okay. So for example, I'd want to bring in a dynamic image of this chart, of this pivot chart, into that dashboard. So I'll just select this, um, and then click the camera, and then go to the dashboard, and then click on the location where I want it to be pasted. Okay, so now that gives me it looks like an image which can be resized. But see, when I make changes on that raw data, say for example, I want to highlight several cells, make this red, make this another color. If you go back to the dashboard, it already syncs automatically. Okay, so this is actually not a an image. This is a dynamic image. And the good thing is you can resize this, so you're not restricted to your column widths. So to illustrate that, let's say I just want to copy this over, but now you'll be restricted to format your column widths. But in this case, it would be just easier to scale it up and down. It'd also be helpful if you want several things in your dashboard. So say let's do this. Let's also bring this let's bring this tree map into that dashboard. So I'm selecting the cells behind, because what the camera tool does is that it brings in a live image of the cells. So after selecting the cells, hitting camera, go to dashboard, click here. No, wait. Okay. Now you have another set of information in your dashboard, and which you can easily scale to how you like. And again, this is entirely live. So if you make changes in your if you make changes in your formatting, so for example, you want to change formats into this. If you go back, it already syncs. So especially useful if your analysis will be transferred into a PowerPoint slide. So one common mistake which happens in the industry is that all of the analysis is being performed in the Excel, and the data analysis thinks that he's ready with the files, so he transfers the significant tables, the charts into a PowerPoint file, but then makes a last-minute decision that, hey, I need to change something in the analysis, but forgets to update the charts or the tables in the PowerPoint slides. So ends up presenting a wrong set of data. So one best practice which I can share is always use dashboards and use your camera tool to make sure that the important data bits are always up to date. And make sure that your data is ready before transferring this into PowerPoint. But one reminder, by the way, is that once you transfer these images into PowerPoint, they will no longer sync. So these images are only live when inside Excel. But once you copy this over into outside applications like PowerPoint, any change you do in your raw data will no longer be dynamic. Okay, so I guess that's what I have for this crash course. Again, I just want to run through a recap. Uh, so at first we touch on basic uh, data analysis activities like sorting, filtering, and data transformation, text to columns concatenate. So again, these are bare bones, basic data analysis skills, which everyone should know. And even with these basic skills, you can already dive into significant conclusions based on your raw data. And then we also talked about the pivot table, which is the most powerful tool in data analytics inside Excel. So it's a powerful way of folding your data, summarizing your data into summaries, and it has an endless capability in summarizing your data, displaying how you look at the data. So instead of counts, you can quickly change your summaries into percentages, percent difference, running totals, and so on. So very powerful tool. And then charts, we talked about the big four charts, which are the clustered bar chart, clustered column chart, pie charts, and then line charts. And we also looked at the new charts in Excel 2016 onwards, which are tree map and spark lines. And then lastly, we talked about how to use VLOOKUP in managing situations where your data, data that you need is coming from a different source. So it's one way of looking up data from a different source. And then we also talked about simplifying the syntax of the VLOOKUP using range names and making the VLOOKUP function dynamic by integrating a match function. Okay, and then lastly, we just talked about the camera tools in Excel to give dynamic lookup, I mean dynamic images for your dashboard, which will be used moving forward in presentations and so on. Okay, all right. So I think that's what I have. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me offline. And again, feel free to get more information through Google by searching these concepts which I have just shared. Okay, hopefully that helps, and have a nice day.
Thank you so much, Mr. Barbadillo, for your wonderful talk. It was great that in just a short amount of time, you were able to touch on a lot of data analytics concepts and processes on Excel, which can be used in our academics, extracurricular activities, and even in the things we do on a daily basis. So guys, remember VLOOKUP. So well, anyways, I'm sure our viewers were equipped with enough basic knowledge to kickstart their journey in data analytics. And so with that, we would like to thank our company partners in making Upskill 2021 possible. Upskill 2021 is co-presented by UP Capes and PMFTC Incorporated in Compass, in partnership with Accenture Incorporated, Texas Instruments Philippines Incorporated, Shopee Philippines Incorporated, Analog Devices General Trias Incorporated, Huawei Technologies Philippines Incorporated, Unilever Philippines Incorporated, Mondelez Philippines Incorporated, and Dyson Electronics Private Limited Philippine Branch.